guys, my name is Jess and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. Today I'm going to be doing my March reading wrap up and part one of my April reading wrap up, and the reason that I'm so late with my March reading wrap up is because in the middle of March I caught a respiratory illness, and it is yet to be confirmed whether it is the respiratory illness that is COVID-19. I don't actually know whether that's what I had, but I was quite ill for a number of weeks, and then as a result of that I actually only managed to read 2 books in March. So not only was I not able to film at the end of March due to being unwell, but also there wasn't really much point, although one of the books that I read in March was over 800 pages long, so sort of it does count as a mammoth read anyway. But regardless, what I'm going to do is talk about those 2 books and then talk about some of the books that I've read this month already, and I will do a further wrap up at the end of April. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk about some books. So the first book that I read in the month of March was Blood Orange by Harriet Tice, and this is a mystery thriller, and we are following the story of Alison, who on the surface appears to have it all. She has got a loving family, she has a husband and a daughter, and she is working as a criminal barrister in London, and her career appears to be on the rise because at the beginning of the book she is handed her first murder case, which is a woman who is accused of murdering her husband. But as you might expect with this type of book, nothing is quite as it seems. We discover quite early on that Alison has an issue with alcohol and that she is also having an affair, and it seems to be quite an aggressive and abusive relationship that she has found herself in. I gave this book 3 stars. It's certainly readable, it is fast paced, it doesn't let up for a minute, and the ending was not something I would ever have called in a month of Sundays, so it certainly had the element of surprise. The reasons that I didn't massively enjoy this book actually are mostly my own fault, because it says right on the cover, fans of Apple Tree Yard and The Girl on the Train will love this, and I didn't like Apple Tree Yard and I didn't like The Girl on the Train, and that was primarily because those 2 books featured unreliable narrators, which this book also features, and I think that it is probably time that I solidly learnt my lesson and understood that any book with an unreliable narrator is not going to be something that I enjoy, and that is entirely down to my personality. I think I'm a very straight down the line, say it how it is person, and if I ever thought that I was being deliberately misled, that is not something that I would enjoy, and picking this type of book up is almost, that's exactly the reading experience that you're going to get. You know, there are twists and turns, the smoke screens, you're being diverted, nothing is straightforward or as it seems, and that just isn't something that I'm going to hugely enjoy. I was also left with a couple of questions at the end. There were some plot points that I don't think were properly explained, but on the whole, if you enjoyed The Girl on the Train or if you enjoyed Apple Tree Yard, then this book will be right up your street because it is exactly the same, and as I said, it did have a good number of twists and turns in it that I didn't see coming. So 3 stars, not for me, but I can certainly see the appeal for other people. The next book I picked up was The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is adult fantasy fiction, and this is the book which is over 800 pages long, and I don't know that March was a good month for me to pick this up because I read it whilst I was at my reading retreat, and then I was reading it whilst I was unwell. Despite that, I still gave it 4 stars, and I would like to reread it at some point because I feel like it would have been a 5-star read had I felt more like myself whilst I was reading it. So, how to adequately explain what this book is about? It is the basic premise is that we have the East and the West, and thanks to a deadly disease, the East closed itself off to the West, and they have since become polar opposites in absolutely everything from their political systems to their religious beliefs. They have no contact with each other whatsoever until the threat of a common enemy rises, and they must somehow work together to defeat it. And we follow the stories of a number of different characters, and I loved them all equally. I thought that Samantha Shannon did the character storylines in this book particularly well. They each had their own strong individual voices and story arcs, and I thought that that was fantastic. It's described on the back as a feminist Lord of the Rings, and I would 100% stand behind that description. Lord of the Rings in terms of the fact that our characters all go on huge epic journeys, and feminist because there are so many kick-ass strong female characters in this book. It's just fantastic. My only criticism of the book would be that the first 200 to 250 pages there is quite a lot of info dumping. Samantha Shannon has created a rich, in-depth, complex world, and certainly for the first 200 to 250 pages I had very little idea what was going on. I was trying to absorb character names and historical figures and saints, and there's just a whole host of information for you to absorb and process. Once that is done and the story begins to unfold, then it is just so good. I really enjoyed it, and as I said, I think that had I been more myself and more able to absorb the minutiae of the story, then I think it would have been a solid 5-star read. I thought that it was fantastic. If you like fantasy, if you like queens and dragons, if you like assassins and warriors, if you like sorcery, betrayal, all that kind of thing, then I think that you would really enjoy this book if you can bring yourself to read 800 pages. And again, hats off to Samantha Shannon, because a lot of fantasy books that would have been this length would have been carved up into duologies or trilogies, and she has stuck with it being a standalone. So although it is an intimidating size, it's thoroughly worth it. I thought that it was really good, really well executed. I wish that I could have the experience of rereading it for the first time all over again and be well, because I just think it would have blown my socks off. As it stands, it's a solid 4-star read. I thought that it was fantastic. I would happily read anything else set in this world if Samantha Shannon decided to not make it a standalone. Thought it was so good. The next book that I read was Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson. I get a little bit confused about how these books work out, but these are fantasy adult books, and this is the second book in the second Mistborn series that Brandon Sanderson is writing. Can't talk too much about this one because it is a sequel, but we are following a crime-fighting duo, one of who is a lord in the world that Brandon Sanderson has created for his Mistborn books. Didn't actually enjoy this one as much as I enjoyed the first one. I felt like the first book didn't take itself too seriously, and it pulled on all the best elements of the first Mistborn trilogy, which is high adult fantasy. So it used the same magic system, and we had a lot of the same influences and historical characters, but it was really humorous and it didn't take itself too seriously. This book felt more like the style and the story of the original Mistborn trilogy in terms of what happens to the characters, in terms of the crimes that they fight, that kind of thing, the threat that the people are facing, all that kind of thing felt much more like the original trilogy, and I enjoyed it because I think I would enjoy anything that Brandon Sanderson wrote. It just wasn't the same as the first book. I found myself laughing out loud so much in the first book, and this one didn't quite do it for me in the same way. It was still a really enjoyable book. I think Brandon Sanderson is an absolutely masterful storyteller. He has a writing style that I just connect with, and it really doesn't matter what he's writing about, what is happening. He could be explaining the most brutal storyline, assassinating one of my all-time favourite characters, and I would still just lap it up because he has a way of telling you a story that is just so good, and I really enjoy it. So yeah, I think I gave this one 4 stars or 3.5 stars. I was disappointed because I was expecting it to be the same as the first one, and it wasn't. That isn't a criticism. It's not to say this is not a good book in its own right. It just was much more like the original trilogy, and not quite what I was expecting. However, I have heard that the third book in this series will blow my mind, so I'm hopefully going to get to that one quite soon. So yeah, just an alright read for me. The next book that I picked up was The Whistler by John Grisham. This is a legal thriller, as are most of the books that John Grisham reads. This particular book, we are following a woman called Lacey who investigates judicial misconduct in Florida, and Lacey is contacted by a man who wants to blow the whistle on a female judge involved in organised crime, and she will turn out to be one of the most corrupt judges in American history, and it involves organised crime and a casino on an Indian reserve. I am a huge fan of John Grisham. I like reading all of his books. I would say the same thing that I've been saying for all of his latest books. They just don't quite have the same impact that some of his earlier books had. You know, books like A Time to Kill, Pelican Brief, King of Torts, The Client, they are all just amazing books that I could read and reread and reread. And his later stuff, thinking like Grey Mountain, The Reckoning, they don't have the same kind of impact that his original books have, but this one was much closer to his original books, if that makes sense. It still wasn't quite there in terms of the thrill and the jaw-dropping moments, but it was closer than some of his more recent ones have been, and I did enjoy it. It didn't let up for a second. I find John Grisham's books incredibly readable, incredibly enjoyable, often have no clue what is going on until right at the end when all the puzzle pieces finally fall into place and you can see the whole picture and you kind of go, oh yeah, okay. Which is one of the things that I really enjoy about his writing style and his books, and this certainly did that. I thought that it was a really solid book, really enjoyable. I just kind of wish that he would bring out something that was like his original stuff, because that would just be fantastic. But yeah, still a solid, enjoyable read. And then the final book that I'm going to talk about, I'll try not to put my foot in it because I get in trouble every time I talk about these books, and that is City of Heaven by Cassandra Clare. This is the final book in the Shadow Hunter series. These are YA paranormal romance novels, and they feature werewolves and vampires and demon hunters and just all kinds of fantastical creatures, but there is a very heavy element of romance running throughout this entire series, which consists of 6 books, and I have diligently made my way through these books. I enjoy them. They are incredibly light-hearted and easy to read. They're not complex in the slightest. They do have obviously their ups and downs and their angst and their drama and their elements of peril, but they are incredibly enjoyable to read. I will say that as a 32-year-old woman who has been married for 12 years, the whole Clary Jace romance spread out over 6 books, drama, high stakes, has worn a little bit thin, and I think that that did contribute to me not enjoying these later books as much as I might have. I just can't think that any relationship could have as many ups and downs as these had, but I think that if you were in the correct age range, so if you were 15, 16, 17, then you would absolutely eat these up and you would love the whole romantic relationship element of the books. For me, it's the weakest part of the series. I enjoy all the other elements bar the romance. The reason that I have stuck with these books is because I've heard that Cassandra Clare's later stuff is so much better, and I wanted to finish this series and then move on to those. So I'm moving on now to Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince and Clockwork Princess, which I have heard are slightly improved, so I look forward to reading those. These are enjoyable. They are what they are. They're not literary masterpieces, but they are incredibly enjoyable, very easy to read, a huge range of characters, and yeah, an interesting backdrop to boot. So glad that I finished that one. I think I gave this 3 stars. I don't think they're ever going to be 5-star reads because they're just not that type of book for me, but a solid end to the series nonetheless. So there you go, they are the books that I read in March and the beginning of April. A little bit of a mixed bag. There was only one book that I would say that really kind of had the wow factor for me, and the rest were just okay. They were enjoyable, but they were just okay. I have read some books later on in April which I have absolutely loved, and I can't wait to talk about those with you, but you'll have to keep your eyes peeled for that particular wrap up later. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to give me the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Let me know something that you have read recently that you have really enjoyed. I always love to know, and I will see you all soon.